Right, this is going to be the 8th video and final video, you might be relieved to hear, on Rook versus Pawn. So just Rook versus a single pawn has taken 8 videos. I think most of them have gone over half an hour, so you're looking at about 4 hours worth of me waffling on about Rook versus Pawn. By the time this one's finished, there'll be 47 different positions, loads of different concepts and endings 21 to 29 in the Book of Jesus, and some other good stuff from the Dvoretsky Endgame manual. And all of the positions we're about to see are from the Dvoretsky Endgame manual. The only surprise, actually, from the 5 studies that we're about to look at is that none of them are in here. This is an absolutely brilliant book. I've recommended it before. Really good fun. Even ignoring the debate about whether any of it's useful to your chess playing, because you won't get any of those positions in your games agreed with transferable skills, blah blah blah, all of that stuff. Is a brilliant book, and when you look at some of the 5 studies we're about to look at here, you think, wow, how did they not get into the book? Because they really are excellent, all 5 of them. So this first one is a study by Averbaka from 1981. It's white to play. Pause the video and see what you can come up with. By the way, most or at least half of the ideas in all these positions, they do rely on us sort of understanding those concepts that we've already covered in the other 7 Rook versus Pawn videos. But as is often the case with studies, they've got these beautiful added twists and some other sneaky little tricks to sort of make us think outside the box. And yes, it's some wonderful stuff that makes you rethink whether you even understand anything about chess. That's what studies do to me anyway. So white to play, and we could look into some moves. I mean, I suppose what we're trying to do is get our king back down this end of the board, preferably with our rook behind the pawn, and also with the black king on the wrong side of the pawn. So we could look at some tries like, I don't know, one move that suggests itself is rook g5. Just come back and attack the pawn. The problem is that black plays king f4, hits your rook, and I mean, you either move your rook again, in which case, what did you put it on g5 for? Because king out the way of the pawn was a move black wanted to play. Or you play king f6. And you don't want your king on this side of the pawn. If black's king is on this side of the pawn, you wanted to play that move, which obviously, well, to be honest, that's not a dreadful move, because you lose your rook, win the pawn, and it's a draw. But it's already a draw after rook g5. So yeah, but incredibly, king d6 after your rook g5 bad opening move is no worse than any other drawing move. It's just a drawing move. So not that, because after king f6, black can play e4, and that's no good. And the problem you've got is that if you sort of make a decision, black can match that decision. So if you play king d6, black pushes the pawn. And now when you bring your rook behind the pawn, I mean, g5's as good a square as any, to be honest. Black can go the way that your king went. And alright, you can do a time-gaining check with rook d5 check. King c2, I presume, is fine. It is, yeah. Rook e5, king d3. And you kind of want your king here. It's like, okay. And similarly, if you go king f6, e4, rook to g5, you match the king. We haven't put in the time gaining check yet, but there it is. And again, you wanted this king here. So in a way, you want to sort of force black to make a decision, because at the moment black's got this spare pawn move, which they can play against virtually anything as far as I can tell. Yeah, black's got this spare pawn move. They wouldn't play against rook g5, by the way. That's not a good idea, because then you really can bring your king forward and choose. Well, in fact, it would transpose. Okay, so after rook g5, e4 would be a blunder, but only because it transposes into the line you should have played. which is to first of all play king e6. Black plays e4, then you play rook g5. And now black's got to make the decision, and that's what you wanted the whole time. You wanted black to make the decision about where they're going to go. If they choose, well, let's kick off with. There's a symmetry about it really, but I'll do king f2 first. We're going to do the time gaining check, back to f3, and like I say, black's this side of the pawn, so we want to be this side of the pawn. And it's actually a very easy win. It looks like we've won it with almost with a move to spare there. Not quite, but yeah. Similarly, I said it was sort of symmetrical. Let's go the other side, king d2. I mean, it is just a mirror image of what we just saw. There's space enough on both sides of the board for, you know, the fact there's 3 files to the left, right, sorry, of the black pawn, and 4 files to the left. Can't do my lefts and rights. That's irrelevant because the A file doesn't come into it really, does it? And it's the same stuff by symmetry. If back in this position after rook g5, it doesn't make any difference at all whether black plays king d3 instead of king d2. It's exactly the same time gaining check, and the king goes this way. So the only last thing that black's got to try is to sort of still refuse to make a decision. King e2. And they've now given themselves this extra pawn move. So it's almost like white's got to make a decision. There's only one winning move here. Only one winning move. For example, if king f5, black can play king f3. Draw. And similarly, if black plays king d5, white plays king d5, black can play king d3. Rook moves. I suppose rook e5 is a possible move, but then we're still gonna. I mean, rook e5 will just be met by e3, and white still hasn't made their decision, so black can still wait for white to make their decision. So the way you get around all of this is the way you force black to make a decision is king e5. And now if black still refuses to make a decision over which way their king's going, e3, king e4, and whichever way the king goes, you just check it and come down to the third rank. So we could have easily seen king d2, rook d5 check, followed by rook d3. The pawn's gone, you've won. So yeah, that was a really good study, really clever. But nothing sort of mind-bogglingly clever there. There weren't any sort of moves that almost threw the rules of chess in the dustbin. Always lurking at the back of all of that was a lot of the rook versus pawn stuff we've already covered. Don't worry, we'll soon get on to the moves that seem to throw the rules of chess into the dustbin. Let's do this position. My screen just shifted there. What happened there? That was okay, I think. Well, this one's still not going to have any moves that throw the rules of chess into the dustbin. This study here, which I spent ages and ages on and just could not get. I spent so long on it, and you know, I was pleased that I did spend so long on it and really tried to understand it, and just couldn't get the answer. I think I've come back to this study about 2 or 3, at least twice, maybe 3 times, and still not got the answer. But the thing I liked about it, and simultaneously didn't like about it, is it sort of really shows off just how many moves a rook has got. You know, at any given stage a rook has got, as long as the board's sort of free, 14 moves. And have you considered all of them? Because sometimes just nothing to do with this position. It's just like there might be a rook on a different position where the rook's on g1, and for whatever reason, you know, rook g4, g5, and g6, they all have the same idea, but g4 is the only one that works because of blah blah blah, and that was just 3 squares on the g file. You know, there was also a completely different idea where the rook went the other way, and this position really really shows that off, I think. If you just go for the simple bringing the king in, you're going to get nowhere, unfortunately. King e7. Black can go king b4, and now you've got to do something about this e-pawn, because if you allow the black king to make contact with the e-pawn, you might be in trouble drawing that, to be honest. You've got to be careful that your king can come and get this one whilst you're... Yes, he says you've got to be very, very careful there. You've got to sort out that e-pawn. I can't see any losing moves yet for white on the engine's list, but, you know, to stand any chance at all of winning it, you would have to play rook e1. Okay. But then black can just give up on the e-pawn. King b4 sort of a move they wanted to play anyway, given their drawing plan is now going to be to shepherd this down to that, you know, white to play as a win, black to play as a draw, which they're only 2 moves away from with the white king nowhere near. I suppose that you'd also have to think about the white king coming in and doing the check 1 rank down the board each time, culminating in a1 equals knight, king c3. A1 equals knight check, king c3, and that's a win for white. So there you go. One of the themes of rook versus pawn is there again, something to think about. But I don't know. After rook takes e3, for example, well, we'll see a3, and the black king just stays here, just doing a great shouldering job for now. Completely drawn. So that's no good. Bringing your king in, and there's no point considering any other moves. Also, there was no disadvantage to putting your king on e7 where there's going to be a it's because you put it on the e file that was wrong. I need to play king f7. There's none of that going on. It was just bring your king in. e7 is the most sensible. Bring your king in square, and it just doesn't do anything. It's just too slow. So it's got to be a rook move, and like I say, you have a choice of 14. Which one? Which squares do something useful? And, I mean, if you play rook e1 straight away, just come and collect the e-pawn, it's pretty much going to transpose, because, you know, what else would you now do other than bring your king in? So I think that has just transposed, hasn't it? That one there. So that doesn't really do anything. You could pin the e-pawn, but black can still just play king b4. You've got the same problem. In fact, this time you probably have to take the e-pawn, because otherwise black might play e2. So what can you do with this rook that's useful? And eventually you find, or rather you eventually you eventually give up and go to the solutions and find rook b1. So and now that's trapped the king on the a file. Let's go through the various things that black might now try. So a5 first of all. Now we start bringing the king in. A4, king d6, king a2. If you're wondering why we didn't hit the rook earlier and then carry on with the a-pawn, it's going to almost certainly transpose. As soon as the rook is hit, we go rook e1, a3, king c5. The king's out. It's shepherding the a-pawn down, but it kind of doesn't matter that there's an e-pawn on the board for the check. If it was king b1 here, king b3, and yeah, this e-pawn's irrelevant to the whole a1 equals knight, king c3 and knight's lost dynamic. But it's not irrelevant if black makes a dash for, you know, doing something about it. What are you going to do there? King c1. I mean, you could pause the video and have a think about it if you liked. But yeah, you take the a-pawn, basically. King d1, king c3, and your e-pawn's gone, because if you advance it straight away, it's rook a1 checkmate. So after rook b1, that was a5 we covered there, wasn't it? What if white just hits the rook straight away? King a2. You play rook e1. That was almost a rule. As soon as the rook got hit, it went back to e1. And then you might, well, why didn't you play rook e1 straight away? What was the point of going to b1 when you dragged the king away from that b4 square that it wanted to go to? a5, king e7, king starts to come in. I think a4 would transpose into what we just looked at. Pretty sure that's gone straight into a position we just looked at. So not that. What if black just carries on? Sorry, what if black brings the king in now, king b3? And this is a really clever move, this king b3, because the sort of the natural, I mean, you look at that, and I'm absolutely certain if I was playing this in time pressure, possibly even without time pressure, you know, it would take me a lot of thought not to play that. Why wouldn't you just play that? Just take the pawn with check. It's a draw. Your rook's just slightly misplaced. Check that. Sorry. Check out this only drawing move here. Shouldering again. King b5. But it is a draw. So not rook takes e3 check. So king b3. Clever move. But instead king d6. a4. Don't waste time with the rook takes e3 check. King c5. a3. Now we take the pawn, because the point is the black king can't come back up the board like it did in that other variation. So rook takes e3, check. And now black's got a choice, really. They can either go down the routes that we've seen so many times, where you just keep checking down the board, forcing the knight promotion, king c3 and the knight's lost. Or they could try some shouldering, king a4, but the edge of the board is well, is going to decide things here in a similar vein. So king c4, a2, rook back to e1, king a3, king c3. It's done. So yeah, that was a study from 1940. Rook b1 is the crucial first move. So that's sort of an into rook b1, and then when the rook's attacked, then come back to e1, and black can't play king b4. If they could, it would be a draw. Right, next. Right, now this is definitely getting into the world of not quite throwing the rules of chess into the dustbin, but definitely you have to really think this one through. White to play. This is brilliant. This absolutely brilliant. Yeah, white to play. What would you do? How are you going to win this? Win this game? I mean, you can see that it's very easy to draw this game. Obviously, just take the G pawn and in a minute take the H pawn with your rook. But yeah, how can you win this game as white? It's fairly easy to establish that your rook is already well placed. And attacking the pawn, that's kind of a waste of time, to be honest. Stopping the pawn advancing, also a waste of time because the G pawn moves. You might have to start being careful there, to be honest. Or not quite, you could just play rook a5 and win one of them straight away, couldn't you? But I think either h4 or g4 are drawing, I'm right. Either, but even king h2 apparently is a drawing move there. So yeah, it becomes very clear quite quickly that moving your rook is not a good idea, which then just leaves you, well, let's just bring the king down the board then, if the rook's well placed. And we can try and do that that checkmate thing where black's forced to knight instead of queen. So yeah, bring the king down the board. You might as well collect the pawn whilst you're at it. h4, king g6, h3, king g5. And you can see that we're actually a little bit behind that. If the king was on g3, this would be a win, but it's not. Okay. So black can actually queen here. And you've got to be a bit careful. You've got to be very careful. You should play rook a1 and take that queen. Do you think that's alright? I'll play king g3. Black's got no checks, other than queen onto the second rank, which we just take. And next move we play rook a1 checkmate. We've won. Hurrah. Brilliant. Let's go and get a cup of tea and wait for the next game, having won this game. Oh. Oh. Oh yeah, the queen can guard the a1 square on h8. Oh dear. Oh no, now I've got to defend king versus rook, and I I don't like the first move. Whoa, this is. I don't like where my king and rook are right now. That's not good. That's not at all good. Um, yeah, that's not a nice place to start defending queen versus rook. So what a shame. What a shame we couldn't do that. That pesky queen h8 defending the a1 square. Urgh. Have we worked it out? We must have worked it out. Queens don't jump. Now we get a cup of tea and get ready for the next game. So win. How cool is that? Now by not taking the g pawn, you might start to think, well, hang on, can't black, just realising that all, of course, start shoving this down the board. You can just attack them, and it doesn't really matter. They've just wasted a move, to be honest. The knight's pawn's going to get them nowhere. Rook's pawn's better because the king's not blocking it. I'm sure there's other ways to win this, but just the simple win that we already know. I mean, I'm sure there were other ways to win that as well, but that was pretty simple. So yeah, absolutely brilliant. Okay, king h7. Do not take the pawn. You need it to block the queen's eventual guarding of the a1 square. Right, next, this is a study by Benko from 1980. It is white to play. This one, the thing I really like about this one is that it includes a near miss on a completely different winning method. And weirdly, if that wasn't there, I reckon I might have got it, because I just wouldn't have thought to look for the actual solution. I just spent ages and ages banging my head against a brick wall on what I thought it must be something to do with this, and just not getting it to work. The actual solution is very, very similar to something that we saw in one of the bishop versus pawn positions that I covered somewhere, and now I can't find that position anywhere. I wanted to sort of have it here as a little reminder, but I spent about 5 or 10 minutes looking for it and couldn't find it, and then I thought, well, this is silly, I just want to get on with this now. So what would you do? White to play. So you might think it's actually the same as the last study in a way. By the way, if sorry, one of your first ports of call might be just, well, let's put the rook up the board, and you know, and if black doesn't queen, then we can start pushing their king off the board that way, something like that. But black does just queen straight away, and you know, I mean, rook. All right, you can win the queen. You can either win it by rook b8 check followed by rook a8 check, or rook takes b2 if the queen blocks. But you may as well, the best you can get out of this is stick the black king on a1. But you can see that's just drawn. So that's a complete waste of time, something like rook h8. You think, what about bringing the king round? King c3. Check. King b3. Oh. Oops. Ah! I know what this is. This is the same as the last puzzle, but you have to block that diagonal first. Clever. Yeah, really, really clever. That's what you do. You play d5, and if black queens, you just play rook h1 check, pick up the queen, and then take on e6. So black has to do something about that, and they have to take it, to be honest, because otherwise you can just, you know, if e5 is just completely useless. Black has to take that, otherwise you're just going to check, take whatever lands on a1, queen, this king can block that, no problem. So black has to take that. And now you've done it. Yeah, you've blocked the queen protection of a8. Marvellous. King c3. Okay, and there we see it. Okay, a1 equals queen, king b3, white wins. Okay, hang on a sec. And if a1 equals knight, Well, this is more interesting because it's not just a simple case of, well, your king's already on c3. How is the black knight lost? Well, it is actually lost. This would be a winning position for white. Rook h4. And if the knight comes back to c2, rook h1, check, picks it off. So the black knight is lost in that position. Okay, but black doesn't play either of those two moves. Black plays d4 check, then king b3, then a1 equals knight check, and we can't come back to the usual square where the knight is lost. And I just spent ages and ages on it. I spent so long on it. I think it must be something to do with that. Especially as I think this position comes straight after this one in the book. You know, we've got blocking the queen coming down to a1. It's just like, it's the same idea, isn't it? We just block. We just need to... It's d5, and I just couldn't get it to work. I just couldn't get it to work. And I suppose this is a mini lesson in chess, isn't it? You spend so long on one idea that you forget that you don't have to pursue that idea. You know, it's fine to discard an idea completely and move on to something else. And if it was a game of chess, I think I would have done that more easily rather than a study. Because once you're onto something in a study that's got some sneaky little trick in it like that, you think, well, it's definitely that, isn't it? You've just got to try and get it to work. And you know, to be fair, usually that's what happens. But yes, that's one of the things I really liked about this study, is that it has a wrong answer near miss with this d5 idea. Really clever. But the way you win this has got nothing to do with that checkmate theme and blocking an h1 queen from protecting, sorry, an a8 queen from protecting h1. The way you win this has got nothing to do with that. It's a completely different winning method. So if you wanted to, you could pause the video again and have another go on it, knowing not to mess around with king c3 and d5 ideas. You just want to do something completely different. And I suppose the extra clue I've given you is that we've already seen this trick in other places, and there's a particular bishop versus pawn ending which I can't find, which had it. You play rook h1 check, king b2, and then you shove your rook in the corner. Rook a1. Wow. And black's got nothing there other than to take the rook. You know, e5's clearly silly, because you would just play rook takes a2 check and then take on e5. And any king move, you could pre-move king c1, and it's an easy win. So black's got to take that rook. Then what about your next move? In some of we've seen the theme of semi-stalemate on the king and pawn endings, and I can't remember which square you needed to go to in where we did this with a bishop. We stuck a bishop in the corner, let a king take it, and then come in with the semi-stalemate. I think it's usually this square you have to come to, because there's an opponent's pawn coming down the board and you just want one extra move from not being checked. But in this particular case, you are going to let this pawn come down the board, and you don't want to be checked there. So don't go to c1. You semi-stalemate, or you stalemate the black king on c2, and the game just ends like this. Queen. What does black do? What do you do as black here? Obviously, if you queen, that's checkmate. Next move, sort of the fruitless queen c3 block. And if you knight, I don't think this is difficult. King c3 was fine as well, but king b3. I mean, you've got queen d1 mate there, haven't you? And if knight d3, queen d4 check. How about that? Rook a1. Amazing stuff. Right, last but definitely not least, this is... Is it worth pausing the video on this one? I doubt it. You can if you want, but yeah. Yeah, find the strongest chess player you know. You might know a grandmaster or something. Show them this, and unless they've seen it before, and hustle you by pretending they haven't or whatever, they're not going to work this one out. I don't think. That's my challenge. Find the strongest chess player you know and see if they can solve this. So you may as well just enjoy it. But yeah, pause the video if you want, I suppose. So what do you do here? White to play. I don't know if I've said that. This is a study from 1912. So 1912. It's 113 years old. It's amazing. Right, the first thing you do is take the e-pawn. And then, I mean, black hasn't really got a lot of choice here. You know, if black just sort of doesn't play the obvious rook c1 check and does something like rook c7, you can take the f pawn. I don't know why that took me so long to work out which file that pawn was on. And yeah, I mean, this isn't going to be beautiful or elegant, but you've got a rook, a knight, and a pawn versus a rook. That's clearly going to be a win as long as you can find a way to defend that, which you can. It can't be attacked on e7 because of the knight d5 fork, and it can't really be attacked very easily on c6 either, can it? What would we do there? Some sort of check, possibly e7, even e7 straight away and go on the g file when you get your knight taken. But there must be something better. Oh yeah, rook h6. There you go. So the pawn's still poisoned because of a knight check picking up the rook. Anyway, yeah, it's clearly black's not going to do that. They're going to go rook c1 check. Okay. And now after the sort of the only move, king g2, rook takes h1, king takes h1, king c6. You've lost your e-pawn. That knight cannot defend that e-pawn. It's a draw. So like, hang on, what are you talking about? If you said white to play and win. Like, yeah, take the e-pawn, rook c1. And how many people would think of king g2 as the only move? You wouldn't. Who would spend any time thinking about this? That at the very least is a lesson, isn't it? No. Always think about these moves, these crazy moves. And it's not like king f2 is so crazy it has no purpose. It does have a purpose. You can see its purpose. You're guarding the e1 square. So it was definitely worth thinking about. Anyway, let's see. Rook takes h1, e7. And we've got the Saavedra theme coming into things. If rook takes h7, then I guess that's going to be sort of annoyingly hard to win. But the positioning of the king and the rook, probably not actually. The engine's giving that as plus 3.6, which is much higher than the usual queen versus rook without the pawn. But it's not that. Okay, we're going to take it as assumed that if white gets that pawn to queen, that they've won. So how does black stop that pawn? Okay, well, what they do is they start a series of checks. Rook h2 check. And this is going to remind us, I think, of the Saavedra position. If the white king steps onto the e file at any time, like, I don't know, king e1, then we can go rook h5. And because the f pawn is controlling the e5 square, the e pawn's gone. Okay, and actually, white would have to be careful to get their knight out of there, and well, I suppose knight takes f6 would be a reasonably straightforward draw, wouldn't it? So yeah, so all white can do, they can't go to the g file because of rook behind the pawns. They have to just go up the f file. King f5, rook h5, and now you've got to collect the pawn. It's compulsory to collect the pawn, otherwise rook e5. Now, if black takes the knight, then obviously we can queen. And if this check happens, which it does, we've got all the same problems as before. Okay, although step into the e file is a bit more subtle this time round. If king e5, rook down to h1, we're going to be playing rook e1 check. So what white could do is come in knight f6, which is planning this block on the e4 square. I think knight g5 would amount to the same thing. But then you just go back rook back to h8. Okay. In fact, if knight g5 would be even more pointless, because then white wouldn't have this next trick, which is knight d7 check, king c7, knight f8, and then you come back to h1. That's the way you get out of that. So at this point here, the white king can't step to the e-file. It can't go to f7, obviously, because rook takes h7 is easily enough to draw. Rook takes h7 check. So it has to come. It's gone upstairs. Now it has to come downstairs again. This is very similar to the Saavedra positions of the going up and downstairs. King f5, rook h5 check. King f4, rook h4 check. King f3. You could have gone king e3 there. It doesn't actually change anything. Rook h3 check, king e2. Let's just go and see that actually. So you could have gone king e3, and then when rook down to h1, king e2, but then rook has to check on h2 and you go king to d3. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to come downstairs so you can switch and go back upstairs on the d file. And there's a reason you want to be on the d file to receive this check on h6, not on the f file. Let's just go back to the way I actually did it. So rook h5 check, king f4, rook h4, king f3, rook h3 check, king e2. There's no behind the king, so all black can do is keep checking, but then we go back upstairs on the d file until we get to here. At which point black might be thinking d file or f file, I don't really care because you've got no hiding place, and as soon as you play king d7, I'll take your knight on h7, and I will pre-move rook takes d7 in that position. In fact, so this is just a waste of everyone's time. What's your plan? What's so good about being on the d file? Well, it's this. Knight f6. What does black do? What does black do? If rook h8, we've got knight d7 check, king moves, where sensible. b5, b7, don't think it really matters. Knight f8, and yeah, I mean the king's not on the e-file. There's just nothing. You couldn't even come down to sort of deliver a check. Oh yeah, that's right. That was relevant actually, wasn't it, with where the king went a minute ago? So yeah, rook h1. Yeah. b5's checkable from e8, so maybe b7 makes more sense, but it doesn't matter. The king's still got the c5 square to run away. So yeah, how's black going to stop the pawn? So they just have to start the series of checks again. Rook takes f6 check. So you've been downstairs. I think you've been upstairs, downstairs, upstairs on the d file, and now you come back downstairs on the d file. And it's the usual thing with them. We've reached the Saavedra position, and we can't go to the 7th rank because the rook pins. We can't go to the e-file because rook f1 comes round behind to deliver a check from e1. We can't go to the c file because black just plays rook e whatever at the time. So we have to come down the d file, sorry, until we reach a point where black's run out of space. I think we could do it there as well, actually. So yeah, check. I think king e3 works there as well. It's over. I mean, that's a 20 move forcing line with not too many side variations. Whack a comment in the feedback if you find anyone who solved that position from the start. I'll be interested to know what their ECF is. But I'm reasonably sure that's right, isn't it? King e3 is just also another way of winning that. Yeah, king e2. Right, I hope you enjoyed that. That's all rook versus pawn done. 5 brilliant studies. The only thing that surprises me about any of them is none of them are in that Jan Timman book, because I think any of them could have gone in there and would have sort of been worthy of their place. Brilliant studies.